birthday, Carlos. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Alex.
joining us tonight.
Yeah,
Uh,
a special
it's
night for us. Thank
That's
you.
right. Today you're at the bottom of the screen, and you're
Yeah,
usually at the top. So
yeah. Thank you,
it
Part. Thank you, everybody who's joining us.
we have a full house tonight, and as you can see, our birthday guest is in his festive attire, and we appreciate you, Carlos. We
Boxer shorts
appreciate
below.
boxer shorts. We appreciate everything that you do
Thank you,
and
Alex.
all these conversations that you
Yeah,
have with artists from all over the world. And so tonight it's your turn to take the graffiti skeletons out of your closet
yeah,
and share with us your journey as an artist
yeah.
and as a member of this artistic community. And so we celebrate you, we salute you
Thank you, Alex.
today on your birthday, and we're very happy that you're here with us
Yeah,
to talk to us about your life
yeah.
and your
My,
artwork. And so I would give a big introduction and big biography to the world on your behalf, but instead I think that our conversation is going to guide us. And so for people that don't know, Carlos has been a graffiti artist from a very young age. He's from the Bronx, he's from Manhattan, and he became a sculptor early on in his life and in his career, and has been an ambassador to this culture and this movement for a very long time. And that's part of the work that he does here at the museum, sort of serving as a liaison to the world on our behalf and a connector to different artists. And so when we start the conversation, I'd love to really talk to you about the Bronx and Manhattan and where you began this journey. And so, the image on the screen is a bit arresting with the caption, but tell us a little bit about your beginnings and where do you come from? Where'd you grow up?
well, originally, I was born in Manhattan on the west side of Manhattan, and then when my parents split, my mom moved to the South Bronx. So I was really between two areas. We grew up in that part. It was kind of almost like West Spanish Harlem, like Manhattan Avenue, 106th Street, and then my dad's side, and then we moved over to Douglas Projects, which was a very famous projects in that area on 100th Street. Those who know Rocksteady Park in that area, that's where that was, on 100th in Amsterdam, 103rd in Amsterdam, and Columbus. That was that area. But then when we moved up to the South Bronx, we moved to 139th Street and Brook Avenue, and that was really intense. So as you see, the Bronx is burning. This is before the Bronx was. It was starting to smolder, but there was a huge exodus at that point, to the suburbs, and there were a lot of gangs, as you see here. There were a lot of famous gangs around there: the Bachelors, the Black Spades, the La Familia, and others. And it was a really dangerous and hostile area. Really, I think after what was really sad, and my uncle was a great Uncle John, who's no longer with us. He was kind of example of the time of a young man coming back from Vietnam, wounded and then getting caught up with heroin, and everybody seemed to be on heroin back in those days and sniffing glue, and there was this kind of look, even while all that was going on, if you remember old New York, there's still a community. There was still people on the streets. There was still kids who were really imaginative with nothing, right? We used to build casitas. We used to, play stickball, skellies, you name it. And so, and also things that were very dangerous. I remember as a kid making zip guns, and getting in trouble for that as well. But that was the life at a very, very young age. It was very shocking, and very horrific in a lot of ways. And we were entering literally what I called a war zone. And what I would later say at the museum, this was really interesting, in terms of what you did with Marty Cooper's wall of all the kids from her photographs documenting kids in the 80s. And when I looked at that installation, and kept coming back to it and talking to visitors about it and about my experience in it. One day I just realized, like, wait a minute, this was a crime against humanity. And these children who are playing in a war zone, I was one of them. And I didn't realize that this wasn't just, this was a war imposed on not just poor people, but the children of poor people, right? So what do kids do? And I think part of the child's play, and as you could see, if you pick up Marty Cooper's book, I wrote in it in Street Play, I talked about all these activities we would have, you know, and in terms of playing in rubble, like rock baseball or basketball with a crate or flying pigeons and things like that. And in the background, there was all this other stuff going on, like on the walls and the trains that I wasn't aware of up to a certain point. But there was this activity of highly creative kids trying to be very resourceful in abandoned buildings and burnt out buildings and buildings that were burning out around us. And Cosrock says Reaganomics, but this was before Reagan. This was in the Ford era and then the Carter administration. And then when Reagan hit, that was just a whole nother like crushing blow. So imagine the lack of resources, but then all of a sudden you realize you have resources built in, right, in the community to have your fun. There's no pool. You know what? We got the Johnny Pump, right? And so that kind of child's play, it ended up correlating back to this kind of search for identity. And it's something that I often say to folks about entering the museum, right? In terms of that wall of Marty Cooper and expressing to them, as you see these children who are building a casita, you know, that's a future architect given the right opportunity. The kids flying pigeons, you know, that's a future veterinarian or somebody like that, right? Because the kind of care we would give our pigeons, the kind of home, the food, it was really considerate. And it showed a deep empathy despite, you know, the environment we were in. And again, children like this, they could have been car mechanics given the right resources, right? So the challenge for me as a young kid growing up was like, well, you adapt to that, you adapt to the street fights and the glue sniffers and the gang members, and the way out eventually came from, you know, the discipline at home. Now you see these kids with zip guns. This was very real. I used to make zip guns with 22 calibers and rubber bands and wood and black tape. There was this whole method that young kids kind of like picked up on, and you know, from making like what would be the imaginary M16 or a Dillinger. So that's really crazy. It sounds crazy, but it's crazy inventive, right? And it's and in a way that's kind of the ingenuity, let's just say. But it's also the child's play, right? This is kind of maybe like the quote unquote a local militia, so to speak, but not a gang, not quite a gang yet, you know. And some of them may eventually have gone into gangs, but others didn't. And so the idea of play was just, again, with lack of resources, right? And that, and I think that underscores the kind of philosophy of graffiti, you know, where playing and writing would kind of coincide together with criminality, right? And of course, building identity and a rite of passage, so to speak, right? And so that, and I love this picture with Marty Cooper with the kids building the casita. And we would have casitas all over the Bronx and the Lower East Side as well. But some of those were social clubs and also community spaces as well. So they had this multi-function, right? And the kids, though, in many instances too, we used to have clubhouses in burnt out buildings. And that's how we played. And we used to jump rooftops, and it was really dangerous. And so dangerous, I remember being in an abandoned building in Cypress Avenue with my brother at the time, Kel. And yeah, it was really crazy. We're in this building, and next thing you know, we hear a loud sound, and a kid fell to his death. in the same building. And I couldn't leave the building. I was paralyzed. I couldn't leave, but I got home and my mom was really horrified and gave me a good ass whipping. That really kind of chilled me out with the rooftop jumping and all things like that. But again, that's what was available. That's what was available in the Bronx, right? When I went to Manhattan, it was something else.
So so all this stuff was happening, you're a young boy coming of age in the city, preteen, and you move, you go to the Bronx, you're suddenly changed by the poverty, the decay, the violence that maybe wasn't part of your upbringing in Manhattan. And throughout all this, there's something else that's happening, which is on the walls and
Yeah.
on the streets and in the schools and in the trains. And I want to pivot to that because at some point in this journey, as a child, you discovered writing, and and I want to know a little bit about that. When did you discover, beyond all this other stuff that's happening, when did you discover writing and pay attention to it?
There's a great irony in all of that for me, and it's actually very special because I remember being on the train platform at 149th Street Grand Concourse, front car, opposite side to the bench, and I was with my stepfather and my brother, and a whole car top to bottom came up, a Lee top to bottom. Yeah, this is exactly the spot. And I remember that so much. And it was this whole card Lee did with top to bottom characters. And it really just, it took me someplace else. And you gotta keep in mind, young children, watch TV, cartoons. So there's really something appealing about that, right? About what Lee was doing at that time. And what a whole culture was doing. I had no clue. And I wanted to know who, what, where, and why. And so, like, for me at that moment, I knew I became quite aware of something really cool happening. I just didn't know what it was. And it really started for me right after that at PS 65 in a school bathroom. And I had found a marker and I started tagging. And my school friend Lewis caught me. And he was laughing at me because I had a really thin marker. He says, like, that's not a real marker. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, oh, I got real markers. My cousin's got like all these markers. Next day he comes back with a uni-wide. I had never seen or heard anything about a uni-wide in my life, let alone how to use it or even like tag this toy name Ace with it. And so that's what's really started. And I started writing a lot in school, and here and there. And then eventually I told my brother about it. I don't know exactly how I told Kel about writing graffiti.
So hang on one second there, Mayor.
Yeah.
And so, how old were you at the time?
Fifth grade, I would say probably like 10, maybe 11. I don't know, something
So
like
you're
that.
10 or 11 years old,
Yeah.
and you decide to write in your school. Like that's, that's pretty audacious.
Yeah, but again, it's part of. I thought if I think about it now, it makes sense because as a kid, um, it's almost like that. Oh, I'm going to get away with this, and it's going to be my little secret, and maybe those that know, who I'll tell. It wasn't really. Again, it wasn't nowhere near what the graffiti scene was really like. It was just a kid tagging up in the bathroom. But the uni-wide, though, the next day when I tagged in with the uni-wide, and I remember taking a big tag, that was to me graffiti. That was real. That seemed real to me. And but again, it was really not a kind of conscious effort to be a graffiti writer or bomber. I just saw this amazing thing and people were doing it, and they're doing it on the trains, doing it in the neighborhood, in the handball courts, the places I played. So I became very aware of something else.
I mean, and sorry to cut you off, but you describing writing in the bathroom of your school, or in this is elementary school, what
Yeah,
people might not know because they weren't around is that the schools looked like the image that we're sharing here.
yeah.
They would be completely covered in tags inside, the outside, the bathrooms, the desks, the school books. And so you were, whether you liked it or not, surrounded by the writings of other children.
Oh, absolutely. And but the other thing too, keep in mind at that period, there was so much, again, because of the gang culture and um, the nicknames people gave themselves, right? That was very common back then, like Little Louie or uh, Cool Kevin or whatever the case may be. Everybody seemed to have a nickname and a local nickname. Anthony became Tito, let's just say. And gang members too, had their, nicknames as well. So that was one part of it. Um, and again, but there was also as I think for me also too, and I come back to this, the kind of the risk taking, because as a young kid, we were pretty straight. We go to church and pretty straight. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose, personally within the family structure, right? And then poverty sets in, and then all hell really breaks loose. And so the conditions really started to dictate, like, well, if you what I was going to do, right? I needed an out, right? And so I think part of the clandestine culture of graffiti fit the need at the time.
Got it. And I'm sure your folks didn't necessarily embrace that.
No, it again. I was me and Kel were really like quiet about it, and then we ended up getting our cousin C Rock involved, Joey, and then another early writer was with us was uh, Bill Blast, because he lived up in Douglas Projects as well, and he was a family friend already. He's like a cousin to us. But in the interesting thing was that, because when I started, of course, at my age, there aren't any real writers. But when because Kel's older than me, when he went to high school, I mean, to intermediate school, that's when he met the real writers. He met Shot 7, D2, BS 119, and all these other writers, right? And then I followed suit. Then we really got kind of put on. Or really, he started taking the lead as the older brother at that point. And in fact, he became more voracious than I did about it. And of course, he's the older brother. But at that time, the for us anyway, when we first started writing, we were really just curious, like who was doing what, and when. We were very curious about this culture, so to speak. And once we decided that we would pursue it, and not just for the adventure and the lawlessness and all the shit that came with it and the escape from hard times, we saw the art in it. And I think Randy was really he's really a competitive guy, and really talented, and he and I think decided early on that it's not that we wanted to be bombers. We wanted to be the next Billy 167, or the next Lee, a Slave, or any of these big names.
So I'm hearing you, and I'm seeing sort of our chats in on the screen here. And for all of those of you that are just tuning in, this interview today is with the legendary MARE 139, Carlos MARE, who typically hosts this art talk, but who is a major and important figure in this movement that we call graffiti or style writing or aerosol art. And he's taking us through a trip down memory lane of his beginnings in this movement, which are in the 1970s. The image that was just on the screen is of his brother, Randy, who goes by Kel 139, or who went by Kel 139 or Kel First. And a lot of the people that are perhaps tuning in to us perhaps aren't as steeped in this history as
Right.
I am or as you are, Carlos. But I want to break it down and just share that what we're talking about is the history of this art movement. And we're talking about people that are pioneers in this art movement, MARE, his brothers, some of the people that are tuning in with us tonight. And when when people don't know who you guys are, I just want to pause and kind of give a little bit of a background, because many people might be familiar with the book Subway Art as an example, which is perhaps the most shared book in the world on this movement. And so if you were to go into that book, you would see the work of these two brothers. And in particular, you would see Kel, who really stood out amongst the other writers of his generation. And so, as you guys hear, or as everybody out there hears us speak about this moment in time, we're going back into time, into the 1970s, going into the 1980s, and showcasing part of our collective history. And so, without these young men or these boys that we're talking about that are today men, we might not be here at all. And so, again, we thank you, Carlos, for sharing this important history and just sharing your personal story with us. You know, for us, this is our lives. For you, this is your life. But your life has impacted many people through the production of art that you've created and through the things that you've been involved in. And so, um, just wanted to bring it back to sort of ground zero for everybody
Yeah.
that might be just tuning in, because we're picking up a lot of viewers here. The image of the screen on the screen is of a young Kel and of a young MARE. You can see MARE there, pre-facial hair,
Pre no
right?
hair.
And
You know, that happened to be, I think, at an exhibition or a birthday party for Futura downtown. Marty Cooper took this photograph, and
oh,
yeah,
so this is a little bit later. I want to go back still yet
yeah,
into the 1970s, because here is the 1980s. You're already sort of becoming a teenager, but you started in this in movement before you were a teenager. And
yeah,
to hear you speak about the tags and the signatures in your school makes me want to just pause for a second and talk about tags and show
yeah.
just a few examples so people understand what we're talking about and what you were seeing as a young boy.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, it's really interesting going, I would, again, this is part of my conversation and trying to help people understand that generation of writers, because uh, before the age of computers, penmanship was a discipline that you needed to have. And this penmanship was really important in my home. My mother had most elegant, beautiful penmanship. My sisters had beautiful penmanship. And so that was a discipline we had to have at home, as most homes did. That's why you saw so much great hand style writing from back then from many of the great writers. And the picture you're showing is of a writer that had a big influence on my thoughts about writing and also writing to a girl. Shorty 13 was dating my Aunt Nancy, and when he got locked up, he would send her uh, beautiful love letters. I mean, they were so flourishing with arrows and aces and hearts, and the style is just like this kind of refined Broadway elegant style that I had been seeing at the time. And I fell in love with his handwriting, and he was down with Kindo and the Six Boys and Box Top and all these great writers, and he happened to be a part of the TNT Bachelor gang. And so he would send, you know, these very interesting artworks from prison, you know, these kind of glass artworks that had colored aluminum foil in the background. Um, and I was kind of taken by that creativity. And again, knowing and looking at the signatures, right, that was really interesting. I started paying attention to more signatures. And in that period, some of the first generation writers tags were still running. The second generation was going really hard. So I got to see a lot of beautiful like hand style writers in that between going between the Bronx and Manhattan. And that's really important, being able to go from the South Bronx where you had the CC line, the D line, the B line, you had the 4, 5, 6, right? And then you had the bus lines because we also used to write on buses. And then you cross town, you hit the A line, the CC line, and then the 1, 2, 3s. So we got to see a lot of like graffiti history during our journey. So we got to see a lot of hand styles inside, and kind of start fanning out for writers like, yes, FDT 56, Oz 109, Clyde. I remember all of this. And in fact, FDT, I admired a lot because him and Clyde were huge. And I became partners with his brother. But the other thing that was really interesting, my two older brothers, my stepbrothers, they were Broadway elegant writers. One wrote Riot 101, Juan did, and my other brother Isaiah wrote Dice 215. And they had that hand style, which teach me that as well. And but more importantly, in that time, in those projects, because you had writers that would come visit. This is another very interesting thing people don't talk about, like this, you know, this concept of housing, right? And initially, the projects were not what they became, a kind of sort of institutional housing for poor folks. But like in Douglas projects, again, you have within a 4 or 5 block radius, all these projects. And those projects became layups, basically. For us, we would go from project to project and hit the stairway. And in those stairways, I remember seeing a lot of these old tags from writers that would come visit other writers, the older generation from me. And so the older generation from me, like in my building, we had a lot of BYB, 3YB guys. And so you would see Dean and Jester, No 3, Fee 5, and others. And so this idea of hand style writing was really important around me. And there was a school across from us on 100th Street where it had a buildup of tags for about 20 years, it seemed. It just, everybody from the original Rat and Kindo and other people that would come through that area. And like I said, you know, that area, those projects were filled with a lot of writers. Gene 13 was from there, that area. And so once I got kind of hip to all of that, being able to read, it was legible, it was accessible. And then I started to notice something else really important about getting up, which was the throw-ups, the fill-ins, the people like In. I became a huge fan of In because he was just everywhere. You couldn't, I'd never seen anybody do like 3 layers of throw-ups, you know, just going in, you know, and Dean, KO, Knockout. And those guys, the BYB, one thing that was interesting, like BYB, those Broadway writers, they all kind of shared a style, you know, a penmanship style, a writing style. And what was really interesting for me was that, like, you look at Dean, right, that D, and we copied it, you know, Kel, we like that D so much, we created D names. Kel created Delt, I created DEO to do that D. You see Days uses that D as part of his signature. But more importantly, as you look at the throw up, you see something really important. You see TC, the crew, Top, BYB, 3YB. You start seeing these elite names, right? These elite crews. And we were aware, we started piecing this together. Oh, Dean, TC, oh, Jester, TC. Okay, I get it. You know, Top, in Top. You know what I mean? So,
Right, they're members of the same crew. You start to understand the connections.
that's right.
And
That's
so
right.
for those of you, that are tuned in with us and you're looking at the screen at the moment, what you see on the screen is a KO throw up that MARE is referring to, and it might be difficult to see, but inside the center of the K is a Dean signature or a Dean tag, where the letter D has a bar that extends out to the left, loops up and around, and curls down to the end of the D. And that's the letter that MARE is describing that's being utilized by many artists still to this day. And
That was
just
innovative. That was truly innovative. Not only was that innovative, the K, which is a K that you use as well, it was truly innovative as well.
so this particular K that I use in my throw-ups, I keep this sort of letter style alive. But even before Dean, In was using it when he was writing Kill
Feel
3.
free.
And that K is a very important K. By the time I started writing in the 80s, no one was using that K, but it was such a classic and traditional letter that I wanted to bring it back and start using it. And then I became known, people think it's my K because I used it when it was out of style, but really it's a K from back in like 73.
Yeah,
And so it's interesting when we keep these old traditions alive and push them forward. And so, some of these images that we're sharing with folks at the moment are those people that you're referring to that were um, really important and paid their dues and were impactful because of the style that they created, but also because of the volume of the work that they created. And so when you look
exactly.
at In and you look at Is and you look at Dean or Stay High 149,
Star
uh,
3 was big. He was everywhere. Star 3, huge. Super Strut. Those were big guys. Amazing.
and then you get into style. And just to take it back, this is still the 1970s that we're talking about,
Yeah,
and you are still a child.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is you in 1977
yeah,
in a layup.
yeah. The
What were
CC yard,
you?
the D yard.
So you're 11 years old.
I was with Kid 56.
You're 11 years old running around the CC train yard. What are you doing?
Well, that was a thing in the afternoon. You could go paint in the afternoon. And Kid 56 brought me to this layup. We became partners with the cool artists. And at that time, you could go in the afternoon and get away with it. And so that was one of our favorite yards because these trains would go from the Bronx all the way to Brooklyn, right? And we were like, oh, snap, we don't have to just hit the letter lines. Now we can hit, the alphabets. And so this was a great yard. And those trains, they were interesting. If anyone gets a chance to research what those trains were like, conductors used to open up doors from the side between cars. There were these kind of I don't know, handles that they could just press down to open doors. But it was interesting. These were, in terms of design, they were very interesting trains for me.
This image is getting a lot of reaction out of folks in the chat, and it's because you're 11 years old and this is your playground. And today we have a very different dynamic playing out in the movement where writers start out painting and they're like 30 years old
Yeah,
and or 25 years old, and and it's pretty usual. But when you go back in time to the beginning of this movement, it was children, it was teenagers that were doing this. And so it it brings a lot of joy for us to see this picture and to remember that the age of writers
yeah,
is when you're a child, when you're a kid, when you're a teenager. That's when you're free. And I see Reese chiming in that from 11 to 14 was the time, and that's when we all started, when we were children, when we were you know mischievous and interested in having fun. This was not something that you or anybody else that goes back started to have a career in art. It was not calculated. It was to have fun. And so sometimes we tend to forget that.
it
And
amazes me. Sorry to interject, but it amazes me to this day that, and we say this often about the movement. It was a movement. The world's largest art movement was created by children, and moved forward by children. and advocated by children. And you know, and these children have grown up, and this is what we do, right? You're a child that grew up and said, okay, well, this is art. Let me open up a museum, right? But that's something that even if you go back to that one picture, um, well, actually, this is good. Go back to that frame, yeah, because when I'm up in the Bronx, the North Bronx now, this is where I really like start to learn a lot about graffiti, because I used to go up there with Kid 56, and I started meeting all these other older writers, you know, Wasp and Schick, the Salsa crew. I started seeing the Tracy 168s, the Marks, the Kit 17s, and those guys from further north, and Mitch 77. And then eventually I started hanging out up in on 183rd Street, and hanging out with Max 183, Tex 183, Code, who used to write Fact, who was part of TKA, and Mitch 77, and we would go bombing on trains and buses as well. And Mitch was an older guy. He was already just, you know, sometimes we would just ride up to the Bronx to see, you know, these pieces that he would have on rooftops, and or buses, because he used to write Q on buses. So early on, there was a migration out of the South Bronx, even further up north, to northern Bronx, but not so deep downtown. The only reason I went downtown was specifically when I was younger and kind of like fanning out on Lee, trying to find Lee.
So wait a minute. So it was, first of all, what you're sharing with us on the screen and the images that we have in front of us are significant. And so you mentioned Wasp and Schick, and we get to see a Wasp and Schick train here. And Wasp
They were kings. Those guys were kings.
they were huge and they were kings, but Wasp passed recently. So
Yes.
rest in peace, Wasp, first and
Yes.
foremost. So that for those of you that don't know, and you're seeing a selection of pretty important but yet rare images. And so something to remember, that as we share these images, a lot of these images are fairly rare, and these are not necessarily circulated images, and you're going pretty deep with your history and speaking about a lot of writers that most people might have never heard of. Maybe no one's heard of Wasp outside of the Bronx, although he had a major impact in your life.
Right. There's something I will say about this culture. It's really bigger than we can put our arms around, even for historians, because there was no true concept of documentation and databasing and cross-referencing, and because there was so much of it, and there were a lot of people, you know, going way back to the first generation that people don't talk about, you know, the Vinnies of the world, and the, you know, other great legends, you know, on Deadleg, you know, and people who really kind of were really prolific. And these guys, I mean, imagine, you know, again, as a kid, here you see somebody, another kid, you know, drawing a bridge and a cityscape, top to bottom. Like, that's unheard of. So imagine like benching trains and something like this rolls up.
It's a wonderful piece. It's a wonderful piece, and so this is what you're surrounded by, and this is what you're seeing, and you're starting to meet these writers that are a bit older than you. You're going uptown, and you start to encounter a lot of style, you know.
Yeah.
And from what you've told me in the past, you and your brother started to gravitate towards the discovery and the practice of style,
Oh
and
yeah.
really made it your mission. And
Yeah.
so, but
Yeah.
take us a little bit in that direction. Why was someone like Jester so important? Why was someone like Slave so important?
I smile because I have so much love for that work, for what they did. You know, Jester had the most beautiful penmanship. It's a dynamic. One, he was just up everywhere with his name Jester and DY. But his signature, if you look at that, that just influenced everybody. And It's such an important signature that people don't even realize. Even I'll share this with you. I remember being on a panel with Carlo McCormick and Jeffrey Deitch and some other folks, and they were talking about the mission school and specifically about Twist. They were fawning over Twist, and I love Twist. I think he's a fantastic writer, hand style guy. But I'm like, in their phoning, I say, it's like, you know nothing about graffiti, because that's his signature, and many of us, that is so connected to this guy Jester that no one in history will remember as being such an influential hand styler. And to me, like when I think of great hand stylers like Twist, I think of the impact Jester had on all of us. But more importantly, Jester, again, he was everywhere. And he was considered one of the top writers at the time. And you could see in this tag just the flow, the fluidity, the balance of a signature, the command of the signature. And this is one of his many signatures. And so he was super important to us. Still, a lot of people, I got to tell you, I remember once at the Guernsey auction, I forget what year that was, we're all there, all the top writers you could think of, from Iz to Part and everybody. And inside, this guy was there and he was signing something. He wrote Jester. And I couldn't believe it. Nobody knew where this guy was. Nobody. And I completely fanned out. And I says, yo, I ran out. I told everybody. They were like, even the grown men were fanning out. And I ran back to Jester and I says, yo, you have no idea. You have to come outside. You have to come talk to these guys. He goes outside, and again, grown men who are kings are like bowing down to Jester, being like, wow, like, you're alive, you're Jester. And so this is how we are in the community, right? We don't forget, we remember people like that affectionately, because they help shape some of us. Right? And Slave, on the other hand.
Wait, hold on one second.
Yeah.
So just to break down what you're saying a little bit further, we are all looking at a Jester tag on the screen. This tag probably helped shape thousands of tags after it that most people don't even know that Jester is in their DNA. I mean, just people don't know. When you look at that letter J is bouncing and curling. When you look at the letter E and how it has that lean and the curve at the bottom of it. The letter S, how the bottom of the S curls up and then bends down, right? The letter R, this sort of uppercase letter R, that curls at the bottom. I mean, there is so much
think of
style.
Think of Zephyr and his R, like
you could think
like
of
that.
Zephyr. I could think of dozens and dozens of writers all over the world that have elements of these letters in their tags that do not have any knowledge of Jester at all. That has just been handed down tag to tag to generation from generation to generation. But here you go. Here's a hand style that has influenced everybody. This is I would say, an unsung hero or an unsung influence in our movement. And here it is. We get to see it. This is an original Jester tag from the 1970s. Much respected Jester. He's alive and around today. And the reason why this tag had so much impact wasn't only the style of the tag. The letter J, I agree, is amazing. The way that the letters fit all together tightly and neatly is it's amazing. It's beautiful. But the reason why he had such an impact beyond the beauty of the signature was the amount of times he actually wrote it. This guy was a king, and he wrote it so much that you couldn't even get around seeing it. And me personally, I'm a much younger writer than you, I guess, in history, right? And I remember the first time I saw that letter E being written in front of my face by a writer in Brooklyn, and I was thrown off, like I was, over the top when I saw that letter E, and that is easily, I don't know, 8 years after the letter E was already around by Jester. So just to pay respect, just to put this in context, we might be harping on a very small thing here at this moment, but
Oh,
this
but
is
it
something of
is.
major impact.
Yeah, I agree. It's important. I think it's
It's a major impact moment for the movement
yeah.
that I think people might not really even know. And so the next person that we wanted to talk about, simply because of their impact on you personally, but also on the greater movement,
On the movement, yeah.
was Slave.
Slave. Wow. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. You know what to say about Slave, man. It is interesting because the Fabulous Five, I mean, they really had, to me, I mean, they were, some did some good style pieces back then, Doc, and then they did top to bottom style pieces. But really, Lee and Slave had a real kind of focus at a point in wild style and style writing. And it's kind of rare to see Lee pieces of style, you know, like style writing pieces. He eventually kind of moved in a different direction, but Slave, holy crap, man. And what was really impactful about Slave was the name itself, right? Somebody calling themselves a slave. So that in itself was like, wow, you know, like somebody kind of really kind of diffusing the power of that and giving it a different kind of power, right? A creative power. And what Slave was able to do with his name was phenomenal. I mean, he had a big, really big, commanding pieces like this one here that really, I used to copy this. I used to, you know, trace my photos and be on the lookout for slave and bot pieces. And this generation, he influenced a lot of Brooklyn writers. Dondi told me he was one of his main influences back in the day as well. Um, and again, being part of the Fabulous Five, that was the most elite group. Uh,
So can we just pause for a second? Is
yeah,
everybody seeing this Slave piece on the screen that I'm seeing here? It is outrageous.
yeah,
The way that the L connects to the A, the way that the S is being sliced up at the very top and then
crazy.
turning into an arrow and turning into a star.
Yeah. Look at that V. I mean, everything about it is just wonderful.
This is a 5 letter piece. When you see people piecing on a panel of a train looking all small, this is a panel and a half. This is a big piece. This is a serious piece.
Yeah,
And it's probably 3 colors.
probably 3 or 4 colors. Yeah,
He's not relying on tricks. This is
no,
pure style.
yeah, love it.
And so when we look at this, and this is, I would say this is probably circa 1978.
Yeah, correct. That's
There's no
amazing,
tricks. There's no
amazing.
tricks. It's
No,
amazing. It's burning.
yeah,
It's
that, that's all Rust-Oleum. It's crazy.
right. There's no fancy caps. There's
No,
no fancy spray paint.
no,
It's 3 colors, done.
yeah,
Burning the line, pure style. This is what you're looking at. This
yeah.
is where, like, this is the bar.
Right. And see, the thing is that this, looking at these kinds of things and these artists, it's something that's kind of transferred over into how myself and Kel and my crew, the rock stars and CIA and TKA, how we were painting, and eventually it's even not even so much you know, there's something about the command of a, you know, the of style, right? And how things work, what they allude to in space, and that would always stay with me. Right in front of us now, we have the first piece I did with Dondi and Kel in Brooklyn in East New York at the J Yard. Dondi did a Cash piece because he had different names. Cash, he did the Cash. I did the MARE, and the MARE outline was Kel and Dondi helping me out with that. and then of course Kel. Now, in a previous picture you showed, there was a Kid 56 and Naco. That was the first connection between our crew in the Bronx and Brooklyn. And Kel at the time, Kel liked, he was on the lookout for the best writers and wanted to paint with the best writers. And so, you know, he hooked up with Kid, and he put him onto Dondi and Duro. And then we went up to East New York and we started meeting all these other guys, Hurst, James, Hulk, IK, another not known guy who's a short guy that painted 3 times his size. That was incredible. And this piece was done in a J yard. And interestingly enough, the J yard is a big train yard that had 2 levels, and we were painting on the upper level. And once we were finishing our pieces, and then we got raided. And that was kind of crazy, and having to jump down to the next level and escape, and we all did. But those were crazy times. And also, I would say, keep in mind, I'm a young kid starting to go to Brooklyn, to East New York, to Bed-Stuy.
So can I jump in for a second? This
Yeah.
is 1978.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I don't know, do the math. You know,
All right, so you're
probably
very
like,
young.
like
You're
13, 14.
right. You're 13 or 14 years old. You're going to Brooklyn. You're painting with Brooklyn writers. You're in East New York. I'm from the J Line. I know the area very
Yeah.
well. It's not a very safe area
Not at all.
at all. If you saw the pictures of the Bronx burning, Brooklyn was burning the same way.
Yeah.
And you're traveling all the way, probably minimum of an hour on the train,
Yeah.
right? Probably more. When you go to East New York was even worse than the Bronx,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And you're getting to paint with these Brooklyn writers. And I, you know, being from Brooklyn, I'd like to say that the Bronx gets a lot of props. Brooklyn doesn't get a lot of props. So I'm happy to hear a story about Brooklyn.
Oh, you had great
And I
writers
think
in Brooklyn, for
and
sure.
all the writers that you're mentioning are, you know, these Brooklyn writers. And so here you are, a young teenager, writing with all these, you know, these gods from Brooklyn, the top crew.
Yeah.
And so for all of you guys that are out there listening, you know, the people that MARE mentioned, Hulk, James, Dondi, the crew that he's speaking to about, rather, is the top crew. And here you
The
are,
odd
young,
partners.
right? The odd partners. And here you are talking about this crew, and the first example of you painting with them, the MARE piece, the Cash piece, the Kel piece, they're outrageous. I can see what you guys are doing. There's this combination of a pipe style happening with these connections,
That's
right?
right.
Your entire piece is connected. It's
So there's
one.
something, let me interject something really important, right? Because we're Bronx writers. We're used to painting on 2 panels. And Brooklyn trains, these trains had 3 panels. And that's a huge difference for us. Actually, it's
3-man cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is a very pivotal piece. And so for within this movement, you know, in our history, so much emphasis or so much love is placed on Dondi, you
Yeah.
know,
Rightfully so.
Dondi as a style master, and also on your brother, but Dondi passed a very long time ago.
Yeah.
And you got to paint with Dondi many times, this being the first
Duro.
time, and Duro and these Brooklyn legends.
Yeah.
And you had to raise the bar on your own style
It
to
was
paint with
hard.
them. How was that?
It was hard. It was not easy. It was not easy. One, I was a short kid. So I, you know, really had a hard time reaching the top sometimes. These guys, I had smaller hands. You know, I got to tell you, I was a student of these guys, and when we painted together. They taught me. They helped me paint. You know, Kel, my first time painting, I was standing on, I was on my brother's shoulders, painting a train. And years later, I did that for my younger brother, put him on my shoulders to paint. But again, the bar was so high because if you go back to the other picture, right? of the not the slave, the TDS whole car. This was what we were looking at. We were looking like, you could not believe the things we were seeing, like the Cools and the Padres and all the great TDS whole cars, the TMT whole cars, you know, Chain 3 and Knock. Part especially was one of our favorites. Chain was another one. I mean, you look at Chain, these are some of his most exquisite works. The Fives.
So
And
this is an outrageous set of cars. What we're looking at is a
yeah,
part and fives by part and chain 3, right? And we're looking at a chain worm 2 by chain and part.
yeah.
And these guys were the best on the line.
So,
TMT,
yeah.
TDS. And so you had some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, and the irony and particularly with this image is that I happened to walk into the one tunnel with Kid 56, and Part and Chain were painting like 6 whole cars or something like this. I could not believe. Imagine your heroes. You walk in, it's like walking into their studio. But this is at the highest level. There was nobody better in New York City than these guys at all. Nobody.
So this is 1978.
This is 78, 79. No, 78
79.
probably.
Yeah, this is, I
Somewhere
think,
around there.
1978. And Part, who's on this, yeah, Part is on here. He
78,
confirmed
yeah.
this is 1978.
So if Part, we remember, you know, that was just phenomenal. But one, here's the thing. You walk in there, 2 of the best are painting. They're using the best paint you can get at the time. You know, the Red Devils, all the exotic colors. And they're just firing this up. Who else was there? P5, he used to write Nut, P5. And Kid and I were there. And an interesting anecdote to this was that, and I didn't stay long because I ended up trying to grab a scrap can and it hit the 3rd rail and I got shocked. And thank goodness, I really freaked out. I started like crying and I left the layup. But this was always resonating in my mind and my life to see some of the grand masters at work. And, you know, TDS, what we were aiming for, especially with Crash, when we were writing with Crash and with Dondi, was to elevate to that level. We were like kind of the ones who would inherit the crown, so to speak. And so it was for us, we kept learning from them and biting them, and then ultimately challenging TMT. Even though we really admired them greatly, there was a competition that built between us, and a rivalry, unfortunately, because some of us were friends. But what happened was, and this is the ethics that we held at that time, we would never, ever, even if we were like at war, we would never touch any of these whole cars. We would never cross them out on the outsides, never. But we would go on the insides. If those who remember the war, the drip war with Duro, Dondi, Lovin, myself, all of us, we used to get Flowmaster ink, and we would just flood panels over each other. And that was the extent of that.
So folks, we are at an hour into our conversation with MARE. MARE challenged me. He told me we would be able to get to 1980 in an hour. We are only at 1978. We've done 2 years of history with MARE over the course of an hour. He's a living legend. He's done so much and contributed and has witnessed so much of this this history that we love and these artists that we love so much. And we are very happy to host MARE for the first time and hear his story. And so we are at the hour mark. I don't know if I want to continue. You guys have to tell me if we should we continue? Should we add some more time to this talk, or should we call it a night? You know, I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
I'm really enjoying this, MARE. I really love that you're able to share all this deep personal history and these relationships that you developed and sort of the insight into what was happening. And so I'm very thankful to you. Futura says continue. Osgemio says continue. Let's try a little bit more. It is, after all, your birthday. And so what we're going to do, because we love you so much, is we're going to log off for a minute before Instagram kicks us off. And we're going to log right back on, and we will do another round two. I think we'll probably get through 1980 in the next hour. And so thank you so much, Mayor. Everybody, Volk, Futura, Ostemios, Reds, Part,
thank you,
everybody.
It means a lot.
Thank you guys for joining us. We are logging off.
We'll be right back.
And we're logging right back on. We're gonna get a drink, and in 60 seconds we'll be back. Thank you so much, Carlos.
Fair enough. I'm here.
Peace.